Hello, everyone. I'm Terry Mottershead, the Executive Director of the Centre for Legal Innovation at the College of Law, and I'm really delighted to be here today with Peter Dobkins. And I'm going to introduce Pete to you in just a second, but I wanted to mention, as you know, that this is a session for our young legalpreneurs special interest group in our legalpreneurs lab. So welcome to all of those members. But it's kind of a double header because it's also part of our innovation series, which we literally launched over the weekend, and deliberately a double header because it really is that critically important to everything that we're doing in the legal ecosystem now. Peter is, well, we refer to him as the legal project management guru. He's a long-standing friend of the Centre's, I'm delighted to say, but in his other roles that he's got as well, he's an adjunct associate professor with the University of New South Wales Faculty of Law and, of course, a director with PwC New Law as well. So having said all of that, Pete, it's always a pleasure to welcome you, and in this case, definitely welcome back. And to everyone here, welcome as well to Legal Project Management Foundations. Over to you, Pete.
Terry, thank you very much for the exceptionally warm introduction. Hello, everyone. All right, let's get started for this hour of power on all things legal project management. It's going to be fast and furious. We are going to cover a lot of content. We'll do our best to take questions at the end, but yeah, if not, you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. So let's start with a little bit of background in terms of context, in terms of frame setting of where we are. And I love starting this discussion with this particular slide. So it's a tale of two professions. Now, on the left-hand side, we have the medical profession. This is a lithograph from the 1700s, and you can see, it's pretty terrible and hideous in terms of how they're going about it. Someone's head is being put into a kiln and dreams are coming out because that's how medicine works. But you can kind of see how it was back then. But then you fast forward about 300 years and you see a very different scenario, medicine present day. You know, the differences are quite stark. We have a high-performing orchestrated team, technology enabled. Very different outcomes for the patient, very different experiences for the teams involved. So that's on the left-hand side. Now look at another profession, the legal profession. On the right-hand side, again, we have a lithograph from the 1700s. These are, by the way, this deck, which you'll get in PDF form, there are a whole bunch of hyperlinks to almost everything in this deck. So these have got hyperlinks on them for famous cases back in the 1700s, from the Old Bailey and the like. But then you fast forward about 300 years and you can see, this is a picture from the Victorian Supreme Court, not to pick on them, but it's pretty representative. You see, well, the similarities are more pronounced than the differences, right? Same oakened panels, same bewigged individuals, probably some of the principles of common law. So you've got to wonder, what's the impact of that on the mindset of us as a profession and us as lawyers? You know, the 300 years of professional inertia, how's that changed us? And of course, well, we've had a couple of drivers, you know, in the most recent period, you know, not just mention the global financial crisis, but then the pandemic have suddenly probably forced in the past decade more change than legal professions experienced in the past 300 years. Of course, if you haven't heard of that or seen the recent, about a half a year or so ago, that meme of in the US where a particular lawyer was dialed into an online dispute resolution scenario that had their Zoom filter stuck as a cat. You know, sure, there have been some teething issues in bringing the profession on board as quickly as we have. Now, in terms of understanding what some of those changes might be, this is your one-stop shop for resources. And this CLI series is going to probably provide you with a lot of information. But this is in terms of really handy one-stop shop. And these, again, are all hyperlinked, but there's a bunch of resources out there from law societies in terms of the future of law and the innovation in the profession by Law Society New South Wales, the equivalent from Law Institute Victoria, similar reports that move along the top of the screen there from Singapore, the United States American Bar Association. So a lot of great reports, all developed within the past couple of years. I know the Law Society of New South Wales is going to refresh their FLIP report, or intending to refresh theirs in the coming year. A lot of great baselining reports, free reports, just to understand what changes are happening in the profession. And down the bottom, some of the big thought leaders. If you haven't come across these, definitely want us to do some reading, background reading. Susskind, Kowalski, and Mark Cohen. Again, they're all hyperlinked. And we've got a couple of resources down the bottom right that you may be interested in. Yeah, further in what is free time, further expanding your understanding of what transformation is happening in the legal sector more broadly. Now, I wanted to spend just a tiny bit of time on this slide also, because I understand that there's going to be quite a few early career legal professionals joining this call, just to really paint a picture of what the broader legal ecosystem is. Because normally, law school, we tend to think of just big law, mid-sized law is the be-all and end-all. But that's actually, when you talk about by headcount, in New South Wales alone, 63% of lawyers currently are in private practice. There's about 35,000 lawyers. About 63% of them are in private practice. About 20% are in-house, and about 11% in government. And in New South Wales, there are about 7,500 private practices. 60% of them are solo practices of just one lawyer. If you expand it to 9 lawyers or less, you're covering 90% of all law firms in New South Wales, right? In terms of just the number of law firms. So when on this diagram we've got here, it just starts to map out what the ecosystem is in terms of barristers, small firms, medium-sized firms, and larger law firms, and also in-house legal teams. But your legal career isn't limited to those organizations. It now includes alternative legal service providers, including big law consulting services. I formerly was head of transformation at one of these teams. We've got in-house legal operations specialists. We've got the Big Four, where I'm currently now, and legal process outsourcing. So they're usually organizations that sit in low-cost jurisdictions, say, for example, South Africa, throughout India, Asia, that provide managed legal services and managed legal operations support services. So there's a real ecosystem of organizations and career paths that you can get involved with. And it's really important for lawyers to be aware of that, because they increasingly have to communicate and be involved in multidisciplinary teams. No longer are we dealing with necessarily just with lawyers. Oftentimes we're dealing with other business units, and indeed other types of businesses entirely, to get work done. Again, there's a couple of hyperlinks, including a report from Thomson and Reuters, which has actually an annual report on the alternative legal service provider market. So more reading for you there. And I mentioned now that there's more competencies required of lawyers, and this particular framework has been around for a while now, since the 80s. It was first developed in a not legal context, and then was brought across in a legal context in the 2010s. A couple of references down the bottom there. The concept is called the T-shaped lawyer. The idea is pretty simple. You have a deep vertical area of expertise, in this case, the law. That's the vertical part of the T. But across the top, the horizontal part of the T, there are a wide range of other areas that we need lawyers to now be familiar with. Legal project management. Well, after this hour, 51 minutes and counting left, you'll hopefully have at least a better understanding of what that might entail. Other areas related, like continuous improvement, process optimization, change management. Pointless having all these ideas about how we can improve processes if we can't get the lawyers involved to actually want to do the change. Innovation and product development, business development, in particular, really important for private practice, leadership and team management, risk management. All forms of legal advice are in phase, in some way can be characterized as a form of risk mitigation and risk management, and then tech and data. So I'm not suggesting that you need to suddenly become an expert in all these areas, that you suddenly need to go out and learn how to code in Python or be an expert change manager. But do you need to understand some of the concepts or why these are important? Is it useful to be able to understand how to have a conversation with someone who might be an expert, to identify a problem and be able to bring an expert in to help you, or at least start that journey? Yeah, really, that's really important. So it's no longer just black letter law, it's lawyer plus. And don't just take my word for it. You can if you want. But this is a really interesting piece of research done by Thomson Reuters as part of their annual, they put out an annual state of the legal market. And this is particularly looking at the Australian market. Fascinating when you look at, from a client's perspective, what are the things that most underpin or the most correlated with their definition of satisfaction and success? And you can see there on the right-hand side, things like efficiency, communication, understanding business, consistency. These are some of the things that are most strongly correlated with client satisfaction. And if I had to, in tweet form, put a bubble around what I thought some of the key benefits and outcomes of legal project management were, they'd be the things in that bubble: communication, consistency of approach, efficiency and design of approach. That's really at the heart of what we're trying to do with legal project management, be better planned and structured in how we deliver our legal services and our legal work. So that's the smoking gun. That's the voice of the client telling you that this is something that they regard as important. So enough of the business case about why it's important. Let's get into what is legal project management. Okay, and the rest of the session is going to be very much focused on, from here on in, we focus on the overarching what is LPM and then get into some very specific tools. So congratulations, you're already a legal project manager. Every legal matter, and for those that aren't yet working, so by a legal matter, what I mean that is a piece of legal work, again, a brief request for legal advice. Every legal matter is a project. It has a start point, it has an end point, and it has a deliverable. That's as close to a technical definition of a project as I can get. I've got a slightly more technical definition up on screen. It's actually taken from the Project Management Body of Knowledge, or PMBOK, developed by the Project Management Institute, one of the world's largest associations of project managers. PMBOK's like the Bible for project management, if you will. It was first developed in 1996. I think we're up to our 7th edition, which was only just recently released. So it can be regarded as an authority on all things project management. So you can see the definition up there. So it stands to reason that if every legal matter is a project, then every lawyer working on those matters is, guess what, a project manager or a project team member. The only problem is that oftentimes in law school, and a lawyer myself, we didn't get taught these subjects as part of core curriculum. Now the market is starting to change. You're starting to see this introduced into the College of Law and GDLPP equivalents, but it's not still part of the Priestley 11. So what do I mean by legal project management? So when I say project management, you're probably thinking, like the image, that I've got up on screen, a hard hat, high vis vest. You're thinking construction and engineering. You're not necessarily thinking knowledge services and knowledge work. So that's traditional engineering project management. What do I mean by legal project management? What we do is we take the principles, the underpinning principles from traditional engineering project management and adapt them to legal services. And I'll explain to you what I mean by this. See up on screen, and now I don't want you to try and read this because it's deliberately small font, so you can't. But this is the Project Management Body of Knowledge, 6th edition, but the 7th edition hasn't fundamentally changed this. 49 separate processes and plans divided into 5 phases of a project: initiating, so the business case, then planning, then executing, i.e. delivery, monitoring and controlling, basically reporting, and then closing. A lot of people talk about it, very few do it, but that's the closeout. So 5 stages and 49 separate processes and plans. Now, in an engineering or a construction context, and I myself actually was originally a construction lawyer. I grew up in building sites. That was a builder. So I got to talk with some authenticity to this because I've seen it. But our major contractors, they'll have teams of project managers doing this. And the idea is that they have a resource matched to each one of these processes and plans. So we'll have a very detailed schedule, and we might have a team of schedulers who do that. We'll have a risk management plan and a risk officer who updates that risk management plan. A quality plans, quality assurance officer, an overall program plan, and an overall program director. There's a one-for-one matching of the resources and the plans. And that works really well in a construction environment. Now, of course, there's a problem when we see legal teams and law firms aren't structured that way. We don't have the lawyer plus a team of 5 project managers there to support them. No, the lawyer is planning the work, delivering the work, reporting on the work all at the same time. They're they're building the car as they drive it. So it would be really hard sell for me to go to lawyers, busy lawyers, oftentimes some of the most, say in an in-house environment, some of the most heavily utilized resources in a business, and go, hey, I know you're really busy, but can you just do all of this extra work, all these, draft out all these extra processes and plans and documents? Can you just do that on top of your busy day job? Just it might take you an extra 10, 20% of your time. Can you just do that just from a compliance perspective to make me happy as a project manager? They're not going to do that. Not going to have time. So what we need to do is we need to right-size this. Take some of this stuff's really critical and really good. Do we need to do all of it? No. Some of it, yes. And so that's what legal project management is about. Right-sizing some of the best parts of traditional project management for lawyers. Now, just shift gears here a little bit here. One of the interesting useful starting points in understanding what to deliver is understanding who your stakeholders are. Now, by definition, a stakeholder in a project is anyone positively or negatively impacted by a project. Right? That's a very broad definition. It's a bit like the internet. Everyone's got an opinion. Everyone's involved. And so this particular slide is a bit of levity around that. There's lots of, the definition of project success is subjective, depending upon who the stakeholder is. They're all going to have differences of opinion about what's the right way to do things. So what do you do as the hapless project manager? How do you figure out which clients to make happy, which direction to head in? Who do you listen to? Well, let's start introducing our first project management tool. This is often taught in MBAs and business schools, less so for lawyers, unfortunately, but it's called the Triple Constraint, sometimes also referred to as the iron triangle. The idea is pretty simple. We have 3 buckets. We have scope, i.e. what's to be done, cost, self-explanatory, and time. And there's a push and a pull between these 3 characteristics or these 3 areas on any project. So if you want to fix one or one's really important, it's going to have an impact on the other 2. Now, that might sound a bit abstract, but you're really living this day to day in your everyday commercial experience. So you may have come across this. Good, fast, cheap. Maybe you heard of it, right? On a good day, and usually it's like choose any 2, or if I just do bad day, choose any 1. But think about it in terms of, say, picking up Amazon delivery. If we want something high quality and we want it quickly, guess what? You pay more for it. If you want it high quality and signed off, but you don't want to pay much, guess what? It's going to take longer. And if you want it fast and cheap, usually that's a code for not going to be the best quality, right? And it's our standard commercial experience. We know this intuitively. And right in the middle is La La Land, which is what we're always all hunting for, right? We're always online trying to find the deal of the century, the best, the thing, we want to have airport flights. We want to find the best seats and the best holiday destinations. We want it to be exactly when we want to go on our chosen dates, and we don't want to pay much for it. We want that, that special deal. We're always looking for that, but it's La La Land, right? And oftentimes clients will have expectations of La La Land. They want great legal work. They want it tomorrow, and they don't want to pay anything for it. Or they want to pay. They want to be very cost constrained. So the clues in the title: constraints and managing expectations. A tool like this helps us better articulate back to the client some of the impacts of certain decisions. It's like, okay, well, if you want it tomorrow, that's fine. But it means that I'm going to either have to hire, bring on additional resources and work late and get other people involved, and that's going to take more money. Or I'm going to reduce the amount of work that I'm doing. So instead of you wanting a 100-page document tomorrow, maybe just a 10-page heads of terms or executive summary is all you need to get it to you tomorrow. So if I reduce the scope or reduce the cost in order to meet your hard time deadline. So it just helps articulate, it's a structured way for helping articulate constraints and helping you have an informed conversation to make sure that you deliver what the client wants and meets their expectations, or at least manage their expectations. That's a very useful tool. Another interesting concept that I want to, before we get into some of the more detailed tools, who wants to have a guess about the leading cause of project failure? I've got it up on the screen just so you can see the answer right there. Unbelievably, it's delivering the wrong thing. This is a piece of research done by the Project Management Institute in 2016, still across all industry sectors, not just legal. So still absolutely valid. But yeah, changes in organizational priorities, changes in project objectives, and inaccurate requirements gathering. So not quite getting the scope right. The leading causes of project failure. Delivering the wrong thing, which I find incredible, because where does all our effort go? Delivering the legal work. That's where your effort goes. But do we take time to pause and plan what we want to do? Oh, no, far too busy. Just got to get started with the legal work. You might, for those of you who are already working in the profession, you know this to be true. You'll feel that pressure when the client, when the partner or the GC or whoever your line manager comes in and there's an urgent request, you feel that pressure to get started straight away. But to stop, pause, make sure we're doing the right thing, even though that is statistically the biggest risk mitigant you can do to make sure that the project's successful, oftentimes that investment in time and planning, upfront planning, isn't done. And I've got a link there to if you it's kind of for your own edification. There's if you haven't come across it, a great article by Simon Sinek, or video rather by Simon Sinek, in terms of starting with why, in terms of really understanding the importance of understanding where you're going and planning up front. But a great video if you haven't come across that before. So finally, let's get into it. So in terms of a kickoff meeting, or a project kickoff meeting, what are the things we should be doing? First of all, we need to understand the big picture. What are we trying to achieve? What does good actually look like for the stakeholders that we've got involved? What are their constraints? Is this a priority? Is this something that I need to do right now? And things that you might consider: risk, urgency, effort. And importantly, have I done this before? Knowledge, legal work is a knowledge profession. And on average, lawyers spend up to 30% of their time looking for things and not always finding it. And if they don't find it, then they just recreate it from scratch, which is a huge inefficiency and waste of time. Oftentimes also we feel compelled, the profession is a little bit competitive, let's admit. So naturally, to go and actually breach the silo and ask a colleague, have you done this before? I appreciate your guidance. We can sometimes feel a little disinclined to do that. But asking up front, have we done this before? Big time saving for organizations and for law firms, rather than recreating from scratch. So these are what I mentioned by the big picture. These are things we should consider up front before we get into the more detailed approaches to planning. We're going to go through all these things right now. So planning in terms of work dependencies, work breakdown structures, timeframes, understanding who the stakeholders are, estimating, really important, right? And communicating. How are we going to communicate changes? How are we going to solve disagreements? How are we going to form our team? So these are kind of more core skills around legal project management. But we only get into the detailed planning once we understand the big picture. And there's a great book, again, I recommend to you, the Checklist Manifesto. It sounds like the kind of book that a project manager would only get excited about, but really, it is a great little read. And the reason I bring it up, I'll spend about 30 seconds just telling a little story here. It talks about the history of the checklist in professional circumstances. It actually started off in this case, because this book charts the use of checklists to prevent or to help manage infection control in surgeries and surgery theatres throughout the US. But it goes into kind of a bit of a history about it. And it was, we're in the post-World War II, pre-Cold War era in the US, and the US military, or Air Force rather, were looking to procure a new strategic bomber. And there were two major defense contractors, I believe Douglas and Lockheed Martin, were ready to, they'd made it through the preliminary rounds, and they'd actually developed up full working prototype airplanes for a demonstration. Now, one of the planes, I think the Lockheed Martin one was expected to win. So it was twice as good. Yeah, it flew twice as far, twice as fast, carried twice the payload, just all around the better plane. But they had it, so they came to this fly-off and they had a very experienced Navy fighter test pilot to conduct this particular fly-off demonstration. And so the Lockheed Martin one took off first. And About 30 seconds into the flight, just kind of a critical point for where those, it's taking off, it seemed to stall. So it stalled, it fell to the ground, crashed, it killed this pilot. And they conducted a review into what happened. And they discovered not only was it twice as great, but the plane was also twice as complex inside. There are lots more doohickeys and switches and whatnot. You can tell I'm not a pilot, but there was complex inside. And this very experienced test pilot had forgotten to do something really elementary, whatever the plane equivalent of not taking off your handbrake. And he paid an ultimate price for that. So from that, you ever get on a plane, it's pretty commonplace now for people to have a pre-flight checklist, right? You expect the captain to be going through that. Even when they land, and they have a post-flight checklist, checklists all over the place. And what they have in the cabin, in the cockpit there, is a folder that printed, and it has a printout. It's a giant checklist of anything that could go wrong whilst flying, from really small stuff through to really major catastrophic stuff. And for each of those scenarios, they will have a checklist, a very simple checklist that they can follow. Because when you're at 30,000 feet and you've got a plane full of people and an engine's not working, you don't really have time to call up help desk, right? You need some items that are really going to help move the needle. And so the discipline, and that's the key word here, discipline. The discipline of the pilots is it doesn't matter how long they've been in that cockpit for, whether it's their entire careers or it's their first week. They have the discipline to go and read through and follow the checklist. That's the discipline as pilots and their profession. Now, as lawyers, we're a much older profession. We should know better, right? But do we have that discipline? Often not. And oftentimes it's more the more senior, the less likely they are to follow procedure. The more likely they are to trust their gut. So this, what I've got up on screen, this is our checklist. It's not overburdensome. I'm not asking people to go and develop up a whole 20-page or 30-page project plan, but just having as a process, asking those big picture questions up front before moving into detailed planning, and having the discipline to do that, no matter how urgent it seems. That's the discipline that we need as a profession, and it will help you deliver better legal work. So let's get into bang on time, as you'd hope for a project management training session. So let's now get into some of the tools so practically, we want you to be able to walk away with some pragmatic approaches to help you. Let's start now with work breakdown structures. We just talked about checklists. Work breakdown structure is a fancy term for a checklist that's often used in other construction and other areas, and project management more broadly. Now we're bringing it to legal. It's a structured checklist. Oftentimes you will have, lawyers may keep it in a Word document, or they have lists of tasks. Maybe it's a bullet point somewhere. Maybe you're on a Post-it note, whatnot. But this is a more structured approach to your task list. We have 4 columns: what's being done, who's responsible, when it's due, and status and comments. Has it been done or not? And usually status will be along the lines of, as it's not started, is it in progress, is it paused, is it completed? But they could be any project phases you wanted. And it's important to have all these 4 areas, because if you're lacking any one or more of them, you can see how it becomes increasingly difficult to actually deliver the project. If you don't know what's being done, or you don't know who's doing it, you don't know when it's due, or you don't even know if it's being done or not, you can see how you've got a problem in terms of managing the project. So the idea at the start of the project is to build out one of these. In this case, you can see I've been extra fancy. I've even grouped it into phases of similar related tasks. But the idea, and it doesn't have to be fancy and technology enabled. This could be done in Word. This could be done in Excel. This could be done in OneNote. There are project management tools out there like Monday and Asana and Trello that can also do the same. They're all doing the same type thing, but it's the basic underpin. This underpins all of that. This basic understanding of what's being done in a structured way is referred to as a work breakdown structure. There aren't too many thou shalts that I'm going to put forward to you today, but this is a must-have in terms of any legal work that you do. Now, depending upon the complexity of the legal work, you may or may not be able to fill this out in day one. Some type of legal work, you can have a really clear understanding about what's going to be done, what the types of documents that need to be done, and the type of timeframes, and who's going to do it. Great. Other types of legal work, say, for example, very complex litigation, it'd be really hard to draw this up on day one. You might have a window of a horizon of certainty where you can see forward for the next month or two about what needs to happen. But after that, it starts to get a bit more difficult because it could bifurcate in any number of different directions. So that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to fill this all out day one, but try your best. And then maybe in what you do in those more complex scenarios, or more emergent and agile, uncertain scenarios, is you fill it in progressively as best you can. You might have an overall understanding of the overall approach, even in a complex litigation. There'll be overall phases that they're intended to move through, but the precise details you'll fill in as you progressively go through. But the idea is certainly to try as much as you can to get the detail in there to help you manage what the project actually is. Now, so that's your work breakdown structure. Now, you may have heard of a Gantt chart. To tell you what this one is. So a Gantt chart is very simple. It's a visualization of your work breakdown structure. That's all it is. So up on screen, here it is, work breakdown structure, same content, description of the tasks, status, who's doing it, resources. In this case, I've got a start date and an end date. And all we then do is we ping a calendar onto it. This is a calendar. You can see it's running linearly across the page from left to right. And we just fill in the bars according to when each of those tasks are occurring. In this case, I've also color-coded them, just, depending upon their status. But the key thing is it's a visualization tool. The reason the Gantt chart is helpful in particular is when you're just looking at the work breakdown structure like this, sometimes it can be hard to visualize or get an understanding of dependencies. Dependencies are when one task must be, say, finished before another task can start. The outputs from the first task are then going to be used in the second task. So that's, for example, like a due diligence report needs to, first of all, you need to get the information to conduct the due diligence, then you develop up the due diligence report, and then then subsequently a decision, maybe a no-go decision might be made about, say, whatever the procurement. So there's a certain order that things have to occur in. And sometimes it can be hard just looking at this list, with all those dates and numbers to get a sense of it. Much easier when there's a visualization. Also really important from a resource loading and balancing perspective. You might have accidentally, when you're planning it, you might look at it and go, hey, we seem to have a lot of tasks which for some reason we've crammed it all towards the end. So we've got this due date, and then most of our tasks seem to be occurring within a week of that or 2 weeks of that due date. Maybe to de-risk the project, maybe we could spread them out a little bit, which would also make life a bit easier for the people doing the work as well, rather than getting crunched at the end. Maybe we can spread that work out so they've actually got capacity to do it. And also we're not increasing risk on the project by leaving everything to the last minute. So again, a really helpful tool is Gantt charts that helps you visualize that, and you can see when your tasks are being implemented. With Gantt charts, try not to make them too complex. Now in a construction setting, they will have Gantt charts with thousands of items in it. That's too much because, like I mentioned earlier, they've got a team of people who do nothing other than update the Gantt chart. Not a job that I want, but hey, some people really enjoy it. So you don't have that luxury. So normally for a Gantt chart, 20 to 30 tasks are more than enough. Don't put more items in your Gantt chart than you're actually prepared to update on a regular basis. Remember, it's just a visualization tool. The real work, the real value is in the work breakdown structure. That's what you're going to get right and keep updated. Now, on screen, here's another example of a different type of Gantt chart. This one we did up in PowerPoint. And you can see here, this one hasn't got a time frame. It's more a template. In this case, it's a standard type of procurement. And you can see we're kind of going through phases. We start off with planning, then we go to there's a group of tasks in the tender and also in the drafting contracts phase, and then we move to negotiations. The way to read the Gantt chart, a nice little visualization here, is from top left to bottom right. Right, I'll just do it again for you so you can see it. And that's why traditional project management is sometimes referred to as the waterfall technique, because the tasks cascade down the page. Now, something like this is a great visualization, again, for a knowledge management perspective. I can remember when I was a junior lawyer specializing in infrastructure finance, quite complex projects. Now, to tell you who knew what was going on, the partner. And it was all up here. They had a full understanding of what's going on. Was that actually written down anywhere in terms of a nice diagram like this? to help a new joiner like me understand what I was doing fits in with the bigger picture. No, it wasn't anywhere. It's up in the partner's head. So these tools can be great. These templates can be great for onboarding early career professionals and new people, even more senior lawyers that just haven't done a particular type of legal work before. Great way to onboard them in terms of the overall structure. Also, a great communication tool for your clients, because often you might do this type of legal work all the time, but it may be the first time that they've ever engaged a lawyer to help them out with this. So this also, from a client management perspective, helps them understand the timeframes involved, the amount of work involved, the value that you as a lawyer are delivering. Because otherwise it might be hard for them to understand the value that you're actually delivering and the associated time and or fees. So a number of reasons why these types of tools can be really useful from a template perspective as well. All right, enough on Gantt charts. Let's move into a related area around scoping. Let's move into estimating and pricing. Right, a lot of information on this screen. Now, first of all, let's just start off with the big one. Estimating and pricing. They're different things. Estimating is based upon scope. Estimating is where we're trying to work out how long something might take or how much it will cost. And the only way we can do that is to understand what we're delivering in the first place, i.e. the scope. Pricing, on the right-hand side, I've got a fun little cartoon there. Pricing is based upon market. That's more about what the client is willing to pay and what they believe, what the value of those services are at any given point in time. But the two are different. Now, just from a regulatory perspective, so our legal profession uniform law, which governs us in New South Wales, Victoria. Now, there's a cost disclosure regime. So we're required to provide a cost agreement which outlines, and I quote, the basis on which legal costs will be calculated and an estimate at the total legal costs. But there's an exclusion for commercial or government clients because they're deemed to be, I guess, more mature organisations who are able to enter into engagement with a lawyer at arm's length. But otherwise, there's an absolute requirement to provide a cost estimate. And in any event, if you're dealing with, you're in a mid-tier or any type of law firm for that matter, and you're dealing with commercial or government clients, you'll often find that they're, even within a billable hour scenario, this estimate is still often capped, right? It's not just time. It's not just give a set of rates and then we'll just charge and it takes as long as it takes. Oftentimes now increasingly being required to put a cap or a total figure, estimated figure, and often that cap is treated a bit like a fixed fee. We're also seeing in the market increasingly that clients, particularly commercial government clients, are wanting fixed fees. They want us to take it based upon the work that's being delivered. They want us to put forward not just an estimate, but a fixed price and commit to it. And so you can see how that in that scenario, why it's critically important now for lawyers to become much more familiar with scoping and with understanding the amount of work that's going to be going into delivering the legal work. Because they haven't got when we were just in an billable hour scenario, the incentive is not necessarily, the punishment's not necessarily there if you overrun. Oh, there is, you have to explain it to the client. But with a fixed fee, there's a very clear financial penalty for running over. So you want to make sure that you have a very good understanding of the work that's going to go in. In terms of just a bit of a reference, so in terms of providing cost estimates, I've recently had an article published in the Law Society Journal, but it's flagrant publicity there. So that's a hyperlink for cost estimates, which can go into some more detail about that. And then I've also provided a link to some of a really interesting expert called Stuart Dodds for value-based pricing, if you're more interested in having a little bit of a deep dive into that and understanding what that's about. So, all right, more on pricing. Now, in estimating, rather. So estimating, another reason why it's important is because we are flawed as a species when it comes to estimating. There's a whole bunch of human cognitive biases. This is actually a codex of human cognitive biases, which is available on Wikipedia. I've got the hyperlink there. Really interesting to play with. You can you can go around the circle and click on any of them. A little bit scary because we are, as I said, a flawed species when it comes to decision making. I've pulled out a couple that are relevant from an estimating perspective, you've got optimism bias and planning fallacy, which are closely related to each other. But basically, we underestimate the bad things and we overestimate the good things. So we underestimate how undesirable outcomes, underestimate the amount of effort that will go into doing something, and we overestimate the return on benefit or the outcomes. We have the misinformation effect, where our memory of things tends to be colored by subsequent events. Negativity bias, where we tend to focus on or remember things that hurt us, that caused us a bit of pain, more so than the good times. So if we got burnt by a fixed fee scenario previously, we're probably going to remember that more than all the times where we got the fixed fee scenario right. Normalcy bias, where we tend to plan for the 1 in 5 or 1 in 10 year event, but the 1 in 200 year or 500 year event, the existential risk, we tend not to plan for because it's just not within our everyday lived experience. And just to show that we're a real hot mess, pessimism bias, which is the opposite of optimism bias. So it basically depends upon what day of the week it is and what side of the bed you woke up on. You can be affected by any one or more of these cognitive biases, which isn't great when it comes to things like estimating. So how do we go about estimating in that kind of environment? Well, there's a couple of tools about that. First of all, bottom-up estimating. This is when we know what needs to be done, the scope, and we've got a sense, we know the types of resources that have been involved. We've done this type of work before. And guess what? You use your work breakdown structure. Yes, there is a method to the madness here. Work breakdown structure, critically important for a lot of things. So here we've got our scope set. We've set out what we're going to do. We've got identified the resource types. We've worked out how much or how, in terms of the quantity or the duration of those resources. We work out if they have a rate, whether it's say an hourly rate or a per item rate, and then we just multiply it out. And we come up with estimated cost for each line item in the work breakdown structure. That is literally the process for how me and my current job, even how we'll scope up quite complex, big multi-million-dollar engagements. I do it this way with an Excel sheet and work breakdown structure, and we'll develop up a cost estimate from the ground up. So that's what we do when we know the scope involved, and we have a pretty good idea either through experience or talking to others about the types of effort involved to get there. But you're not always going to have that degree of certainty. You're not always going to know exactly what you're going to have to do. Maybe there might be some unknowns. Maybe you haven't done this type of work before. So how do you estimate in that type of scenario? Well, that's where we enter the realm of top-down estimating. Before it was bottom-up from the scope, and we build up. Here is top-down estimating. So what we do, one of the ideas is it's taken from the Agile, which is a project management approach more for software development, become very popular in other areas. They've got this concept called t-shirt sizing. Very simple concept. You have a sense of whether is this a small, a medium, or a large matter. But then you go to a colleague who might also have hopefully got some experience, and you go, hey, do you think this is a small, medium, large matter? And if you both agree, great. But if you think it's small and they think it's large, well, that's interesting, right? Because then clearly one of you have made a set of assumptions. You haven't seen the set of assumptions that they've made. The critical part here is you can't see your own blind spot when it comes to this stuff. It's very difficult to see and challenge your own assumptions. So by having someone else and have their opinions, you get to challenge that. And as I mentioned earlier, for some of this more complex stuff, to try and periodically review the scope as that becomes clearer so that you can move more towards a bottom-up estimating approach, and you can start to actually end up some real estimate as opposed to just kind of a sophisticated best guess, which is what top-down estimating can be. There is, however, a really interesting tool which is used more in engineering. It's called Program Evaluation Review Technique, or PERT. It's a weighted average. So you can see there what I've got. So a weighted average, what we do is we think about what the worst outcome could be. That could be cost, that could be timeframes. What's the worst outcome? What's the best outcome? And somewhere in the middle between those two extremes, there's probably going to be what we refer to as the most likely outcome. And so what we then do is just do a little bit of math. Worst outcome plus 4 times the most likely outcome plus the best outcome, all divided by 6. It's a weighted average towards the middle. Those more mathematically inclined is actually kind of the basis of the bell curve. But what it does is it helps you take into account the worst and the best case, but still bias towards the middle case. Just as a simple tool that you can apply in a variety of contexts to come up with a more accurate and informed weighted average. Oftentimes, otherwise, you'll see people tend to go just give a range between low and high. This is the next level of sophistication. Let's come up with the most weighted average towards the middle. Right, so we are moving through stuff quickly here. I did promise that. All right, let's get into communication and team management. Still nicely on time. So this is interesting, right? There's a piece of research done, and I've got the resources down there. There's an association, World, I think it's Contracts and Commerce, that they put out an annual survey looking at the top, the terms that are most important to clients in terms of contractual terms. These are the things that they think are the most important things that should be negotiated in a contract, right? You can see there, it's all project management stuff: scope, responsibilities of the parties, pricing, delivery. This reads like a work breakdown structure and the content of it, right? This is all the project management stuff. But then we get to the most negotiated terms at the bottom. These are the most negotiated terms of what the lawyers often negotiate about: limitation on liability, indemnification, termination, right? These are some of the lawyer fan favorites of things that typically that lawyers will spend a lot of time negotiating on. There's a mismatch here, isn't there? Why are the lawyers spending more time focusing on and negotiating the things that the clients think are important? Which leads to a larger point that one of the most repeat leading causes of professional complaints against lawyers in New South Wales and Victoria, according to the Office of the Legal Services Commissioner, one of the leading causes of complaint is communication. Right up there with negligence, right? Communication. And a leading cause, look at some project management, so some PMI research, Project Management Institute research from just a couple of years ago. We mentioned earlier, the leading cause of project failure is misunderstanding, or one of the leading causes of project failure is misunderstanding of the client's requirements or desired outcomes. So this is why communication is really critically important. And so I've got there's another really cool reference at the bottom there. It's the concept of principled negotiation. It's leaning off a seminal work by Yuri called Getting to Yes. Been around for some time now, but it's a foundational text, really interesting about communication and negotiation. But that I've got a link there to a LinkedIn article which kind of applies it in a legal context. Highly recommend you read that, and if you want, then have a look at Stephen and Yuri's underlying text. So a couple of little frameworks here in terms of how to identify and manage stakeholders. Let's start off with the RACI framework: responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. This is just a simple little framework for you to be able to, when we've got a bunch of stakeholders, how are we going to treat them and manage them? Because not all stakeholders are the same. So let's start off with responsible. That's who's performing the work. Oftentimes, that will be you. But many times people don't realize that they're actually part of a project team until the last minute, when someone's handed something on their desk and gone, oh, by the way, can you look at this for me? Now, they actually were always part of the project team. No one got around to telling them about this until they needed their input the day before. So it's having the courtesy to identify who's actually in the project team at the outset and get everyone involved. Accountable, that's the person signing off on the work. Really important to understand who's actually making the decisions, because if there's confusion, you may end up reporting to two different people and delivering outcomes for one, but missing out on the outcomes for someone else. So clarity at the outset of actually who's making the key decisions in what areas. Consulted, making sure that we've got the input from all the relevant stakeholders. Hell hath no fury like stakeholder groups that haven't been properly consulted. They'll make their opinions known. And informed, this is how we're going to report upon the work. Because we may be you're doing all the hard work, doing the great legal work, but unless we're reporting upon it in a way that the client actually wants, whether that's monthly reporting, weekly reporting, some want detailed scope statements, others, it depends upon what they're after. But unless we report upon the legal work in the way that they want, you may find that we're missing a trick here. We're doing all the great legal work, but we're not getting the recognition for it. So a simple framework for RACI that can be used to help classify your stakeholders. Another one is the influence versus interest matrix, a little bit more Machiavellian. But the idea is that for those stakeholders that are really interested in what we're doing and also have a big influence over the project, over what we're doing, they're the type of stakeholders that you manage closely. Equally so for stakeholders that don't have much interest in what you're doing and also don't really have much influence over the outcome anyway, well, they're minimal effort. And we've got shades of grey in terms of keep informed and keep satisfied. Like I said, a bit more Machiavellian, but it just helps to understand how we're going to treat stakeholders. The most important takeaway is to make sure the whole team, your project team, has a consistent view on how you're going to treat your stakeholders. So if one member of the team thinks, oh, that's a really important stakeholder, we have to manage them closely, and another team member, I don't think they're that important. That's something you probably want to clarify at the outset. Make sure we have a consistent approach to managing stakeholders. So let's stakeholders. Now let's narrow the aperture a bit and let's talk about teams. Really interesting stuff here. So this is from Tuckman's model, 1965, some time ago, but it's still there's a time. Tuckman's model of team formation. You've got forming, storming, norming, performing, and sometimes there's a fifth stage called adjourning or morning closeout. But we're just going to focus on the first two around forming and storming. The idea, if when you brought a team together, even people that work in the same organization, people assume that everyone's just going to work magically together, like Lego blocks. We're just going to click together. No. Even doesn't matter how often the teams or people work together, even they're in the same organization, it's still useful to go through a team formation process. It doesn't take days. It's not like taking everyone offline to go on a retreat somewhere. This can take 5 or 10 minutes in a kickoff meeting. But it's really important because when the team leader pulls people together, at that point in time, they're not a team, they're a collection of individuals. It's up to the leader to clearly articulate what the vision is. Why are they a team? What are we collectively trying to achieve? What are the outcomes and expectations? And then, really important to clarify who's in charge, how do we resolve disagreements between ourselves, how we're going to communicate with each other. Clarity and roles and accountability. So clarify what we're doing and then clarify how we're going to work together and who's doing what. If we can get clarity around those two things right at the outset, we can supercharge our team and get very quickly towards a high-performing team. If we don't clarify that start at the outset, your team is going to potentially spend a lot of time tripping over itself, what's between gaps and overlaps with people working on stuff at the same time or stuff being dropped, confusion about, I thought I was working on that. Aren't you working on that? Potential politics. You open up the door to a whole bunch of effort being focused on things that aren't the delivery of the project. So really important to clarify this stuff up front. I've got a couple of extra little resources down there in terms of more stuff, broadly stuff about leadership. So interesting one from Jeff Bezos about lessons from Jeff. So you think what you will about him from Amazon, but certainly the guy leads a big company. So he's got some lessons on leadership there. And also I've got an article from HBR talking about the importance of collaboration and how they end up create high performing teams with a good sense of collaboration. So some additional interesting resources there. One of the things you'll be doing when you're managing teams is people will get stressed. A lot of stuff on this slide, but just talk quickly through it. There is actually an optimum amount of stress. Got some links down the bottom from Harvard Business Review talking about this. Too little stress and we get bored, too much stress and we get panicked. But there is an optimal amount of stress. Now, what's super interesting is that when people get stressed, they tend to have their IQ drop. You can see impaired cognitive performance of up to 15 points in IQ. Now, lawyers often overcome poor planning with intellectual horsepower, right? We use our noggin to get, we're all smart here, and we use that intellectual horsepower to sometimes get away with poor planning because we keep it all up here. Some of the most amazing and intelligent lawyers I've come across, they're terrible at planning and terrible at communicating. Because again, they just keep all it up here. But the problem is, when you end up in potentially in a stressful scenario, that superpower evaporates. 15 points in IQ dropped. Now we see there what the impact. NASA has done a fair bit of research. NASA does, as you'd expect, do a lot of research into the impact of stress on decision making. They've done a bit of research into this in terms of what stress does. People get emotional. They have a narrowed attention span. They start to chuck out tasks like, no, I'm too busy. I just need to focus on what's in front of me, which leads to poor decision making and what we call task shedding, just dropping stuff. And guess what? People get a bit narky. Reduced team building behaviors, which is why I've got it in this section. So it's really important when you're managing a team to understand the impact of stress and to try and avoid it where possible through pre-planning. Let's see, we go 5 minutes last time. So one of the important things in terms of workplace culture is to have psychologically safe teams. The legal profession has a bit of a bad rep up until recently of being A-type, high-performing, aggressive culture. Doesn't have to be that way. Shouldn't be that way. So the idea is to create a psychologically safe environment you feel comfortable working in. And you can ask yourself some of these questions. Do I feel actually comfortable asking for help? Can I take risks, and will the team have my back? Was the team going to support me? Am I valued for my unique contribution? Now, there's plenty of studies which also show that trust and psychological safety is a key determinant for being a high-performing work team. So it's not just do it because it feels good, it's do it because it's commercially sensible. You'll actually end up in a much more effective workplace when people can trust each other. And it's important to be able to ask these types of questions. Now, there's actually a really interesting tool to help you do this and implement it. You might be wondering, I'm a junior lawyer, how can I change the culture of my team? Well, there's something called a project health check. It's sometimes referred to as a retro, short for retrospective. The idea is that during a large project, you may ask yourself, well, what's going well? What's not going well? And what's going okay, but we could do better? And the idea is for the team to come together and have an honest discussion about this. It's not blame share. It's not blaming other people. It's a constructive conversation about what's going well, what's not going well, and what can we do better. And I've got a couple of questions up on screen that you might want to consider in asking these questions. How are we onboarding team members? Does everyone understand what's even going on? How are we prioritizing our work? Are we communicating changes? Have we received any feedback? And importantly, is everyone okay? Is the level of work we're doing sustainable? Is everyone okay? Because we have Are You OK Day once a year. And for the 364 other days a year, it's get back to work. So I'd like everyone to ask, are they okay? Now, with the project health check, you can ask this, you can have this halfway through a matter. Why wait until the end of a project or end of a legal matter to then do this retrospective? On a larger matter, why not have it halfway through or multiple points through and course correct? If things aren't going well, let's fix them. All right, and last one, managed to get through this, delegation. Right, and I've got some links again down the bottom, particularly from Harvard, about how to delegate effectively. But 4-stage process. Because most people, when they delegate, they think we're just going to delegate the task, right? Just going to describe what needs to get done and job done. No, there's actually a bit more required. We're not just describe what needs to be done. How about we also explain what good looks like? And then we show what good looks like. Actually come prepared with an example. And then most importantly, ask them to feed back to you, describe to you how they're going to go about it. Not just to repeat what you did. We're not in primary school here, but to explain how they're going to go about it. And you'll get a very clear sense if they're going to go in the wrong direction or not. So delegation requires, a little bit of homework on your part as the delegator, if you will, as the delegatee. You've got to not just describe what you want done, but have some examples pre-packed to pick up. Why? Because I mentioned earlier, leading cause of project failure is delivering the wrong thing. And what's the easiest way to make sure that people deliver the wrong thing? To not describe what you want them to do in the first place. So by taking the time to invest in describing what you want done, you're actually mitigating risk. And if I'll just end up here, Terry, so you're back on screen. I've got delegation is a two-way street, right? So no matter where you are in your career, junior through to senior, you will always be delegating and delegated to. There's always going to be someone above and someone below. It doesn't matter how senior you get. So even if you're being delegated to, you can still manage upwards. Someone describes to you the task and now go, okay, have you got any examples? I'd love to, can you show me what you're after? And then repeat back to them. Okay, thanks for that. This is how I'm going to go about it. So you don't necessarily have to wait for ideally your delegator or your managers taking you through this process. But even if they're not, you can still guide them through this process and manage up. So I think that, Terry, that brings us pretty much on time. There we go. That's my details. Right on 1 hour exactly.
I know. Perfect project management, Pete. That's really good. I'm glad, No, fantastic. Thank you. Just some brilliant tips there. And a lot of information to unpack. So you will have the opportunity to be able to watch this again or listen to it as a podcast, as we said at the beginning. And thank you so much for attending. And of course, again, to you as normal, Pete, really, really grateful to you as well. Don't forget Pete's offer, because it really is genuine. I know that we had some thoughts and questions there. Please do pose them to him. You will find him very easily on LinkedIn. So feel free to do that. Don't forget also that there are a huge number of resources available to you in aspects of project management and other sessions Pete has done for us on the CLI Free Resource Hub. So we're getting ever closer to 200 videos there for you. And also the Legalpreneurs podcast, which is now just kicked over 90 episodes there too. So yeah, thank you. So do please go and have a look at that. For those of you that are members of the Young Legalpreneurs Special Interest Group of the Legalpreneurs Lab, don't forget this series is for you and focused on you in terms of helping to bring particularly the business of law issues to your attention and provide some foundational education for you there. And for those of you that have innovation projects, a critical part, obviously, of that is project management. And so you'll have this and the rest of that series as it now rolls out for the balance of this year to be able to go back to as well. So thank you very much again. Don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter if you want to keep up to date with when these things are rolling out. And again, to you, Pete, it's always just an absolute pleasure to work with you, but also to be able to keep inviting you back. You're such a wonderful friend of the Centre, and we really do appreciate it. Again, for today, as always, thank you so much.
Much obliged, Terry. Thanks for the opportunity, and hope there's some value there for the listeners.
Yeah, huge amount. Thanks a lot, folks. See you next time. Bye.